Welcome to a very special episode of Charter Local Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance, and today, over the next half hour, we'll be speaking with three individuals who have dedicated themselves to improving our state, improving our nation. At this time, there's a lot of discussion about diversity and the rich diversity that makes up California, makes up America. But often we don't exactly know what that may mean. What is diverse? What is diversity? And so we're going to be speaking about three elements of diversity focused on workplace diversity, supplier diversity, and faith-based diversity. We have these three new friends with us. We are joined by Faith Bautista. She is the president and CEO of the National Asian American Coalition. Also joining us is Gil Vasquez. He is the chairman of the Los Angeles Latino Chamber of Commerce. And finally, we are joined by Reverend Charles Dorsey. He is with Christ Our Redeemer Community Development Corporation, its executive director. Thank you so much, all of you, for being with us. We've met recently, and I am so glad you are here today. The first part of our discussion will be focused on workplace diversity. And I want to start with you, Faith, although all of you, please feel free to participate. When we think about workplace diversity, I know that we can often look at the employee portion of diversity, but lately there's been a lot of focus on the boardroom. And I want to get a sense from you, Faith, why in your mind is boardroom diversity so critical as we try to create that diverse workforce?
So Brad, thank you for having
Please.
us. So can you imagine a board that does not represent the people, that does not represent what California is? How can you make a decision? How can you have the right planning if you're not even representing them? You know, you don't look like them, you don't speak like them. So to me, it's almost impossible to make a really wise decision when the board of directors, the executives are not diverse. And what does that mean?
So let's talk about that, because there are studies and reports on boardroom diversity. If you look at the United States overall, it's about 62% Anglo, about 18% Latino, 12% African American, and 6% Asian American. If you look at the boardrooms, though, they don't reflect those numbers. When you think about the Fortune 100, about 68% are Caucasian men, about 16% are Caucasian women. African American men make up 7%. African American women make up 2%. API, 1.9% male, 0.8% female. I don't have Latino numbers in front of me, but we can only imagine.
They're extremely poor as well. Out of the Fortune 1000 companies, only 150 have a Latino board director. A very, very small fraction have more than one. And clearly, when you mentioned diversity and diversity population, you would think with a large Latino base, you'd have a lot more Latino boardrooms, as Faith mentioned. To understand your consuming power of Latinos, to understand that market, to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward as a corporation, I would think you'd want to have that diversity.
One would think, one would hope. I'm wondering, at a certain level, so many corporations are based in New York. And is that part of the issue? While New York surely has a diverse population, not as large a Latino population as, for example, in California. Is that your sense, possibly?
That might be a factor, but most companies recruit from throughout the United States.
Right.
So if you're important enough, if you have the expertise, if you're somebody that they want, I think location is as important as what you bring to the table as a board member.
So if we look at the African American community, the numbers compared to the overall population are lower but not disastrous, arguably. You have about 9.2% of the Fortune 100 boards being African Americans, men or women, with a population of 12% of the nation. So close to parity, but not at parity. What's your sense, Charles?
I think that a lot of that progress happened over the years, as we've been dealing with civil rights and raising our voices to really recognize some of the struggles of African American people in this country. And of course, recently we've been able to expand that to be able to do that for other communities of color. So I think that is probably why there is a little bit more advance in that place.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that we are where we want to be. And that also doesn't mean that that statistic is in any way good for the communities that we represent.
And one point that could be troubling as we look towards the future, we look at our state of California, we look at the University of California, we look at admission statistics in the University of California. For the last 5 years, African American admissions to the UC system essentially flat at about 4%. That's low. Now our state is about 5% African American, but still, that's low. Latino numbers are rising nicely in the UC system, from 23% in 2010 to almost 30% in 2015, but still below the 38-39% in our state.
That is correct.
And so, progress, Asian American numbers have been strong.
But that's not really true.
I know where you're going. Tell me.
Okay.
Tell me.
You know, we're all lumped up in one Asian, and that's usually, if you look at the UC Berkeley, you know, all the UC
Chinese.
system, Chinese, Indians. But if you look at the Southeast Asian, the Filipino, the Vietnamese, the Hmong, they're very, very low. We're probably in the African American category.
And it's interesting you mentioned that. As you may know, there was a bill pending this year in the state legislature to break out Asian American communities.
Correct.
The bill didn't go.
Well, you know, U.S. Census is already doing that. Department of Labor is already doing that. And, you know, the NDC, National Diversity Coalition, is really encouraging all the regulators to really break down the sub-ethnic group in the Asian.
Please, sir.
And the admission numbers is one thing. The graduation numbers are another. And so one of the things that we're seeing throughout state education is while they are increasing in admission, many of the students aren't able to stay.
Why?
Due to some of the systems that exist in the system itself. It is to get a person into a location is one thing. To have an environment that makes them feel like they can actually succeed, to see people that look like themselves, and to have systems that actually help to confront some of the obstacles that they experience in the space, that's important.
And it's interesting you mentioned that. Over the last several months, years, we've seen some ethnic tension on campuses relating to African Americans, relating to Jewish Americans, relating to gay and lesbian Americans. I mean, it feels like our campuses are boiling up a bit. Latinos as well. I mean, it's a tricky time.
There's an unconscious bias, I believe, that takes place. Going to college is tough. Going to
Right.
college is tough if you aren't quite as prepared as some of the other students. You don't have the financial support that some of the other students or the financial wherewithal.
Right.
So these are additional obstacles. But what also makes it tough is when you're made to feel uncomfortable. So being part of the system, being able to study in a level playing field is important. And I think this contributes sometimes to the dropout rate, sometimes to the lack of success.
And of course, to get into the boardroom, one needs to get that BA, that MA, that PhD. And so it really starts at that very basic level. Also, to get into the boardroom, it's probably important that there be some success behind you. And often success is bred through the early years. Are you able to build a business that is successful? And for so many years, folks of color found it very difficult to access the boardrooms that were deciding whether to buy certain products. And that's what we're going to talk about when we come back. It's the question of supplier diversity. Gil, you've been looking at that. I want to rely on you, if we may, as we look at the question of supplier diversity. My name is Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on Charter Local Edition. Welcome welcome back to Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We're engaged in an extended discussion about diversity in California, diversity in America. Over this segment of our program, I'd like to speak about supplier diversity. We are joined by Bautista of the National Asian American Coalition. We have Reverend Charles Dorsey of Christ Our Redeemer Community Development Corporation, and Gilbert Vasquez of the LA Latino Chamber of Commerce. And I want to turn to you, sir, to discuss supplier diversity, which I'm going to be honest, my guess is most people don't even know what that means. Am I right? I mean, you giggle, Faith, but am I right?
Right.
Well, people don't know enough about it. I think they understand diversity. I think they understand procurement. But when you put the two together, and you don't realize that how many times the ethnic minority community is left out of opportunities to do business with corporate America.
And my guess is, and look, I could be wrong and naive, but it may not be intentional. It's just you call on your friends. Oh, you need this business, I'll call on you. And if corporate America is not diverse, who are they calling on?
Absolutely, the friends. And it's easy to continue to maintain contracts with people that you know.
Exactly.
You feel more comfortable.
Do
and
you
this is
disagree,
why
Faith, though? I saw you giggle.
No, it's because supplier diversity is been my issue, fighting for the contracts that's locally in this state, right?
Sure.
You see all these big contracts, their supplier came from outside California, and they said that they cannot find anybody in California. That's baloney.
And it's interesting because, Gil, I know you're a very significant proponent of local preferences, which can be a way to address the issue Faith brings up. Explain local preferences.
local preference is doing business with the local community and having goals and making sure, as Faith pointed out, that we're not going to New York or we're not going to Florida or Chicago to bring in contractors and business owners to do business that can be done locally.
And this was stunning to me. Last night, I'm that guy. I went onto the Census Bureau website to look at the statistics on minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses. You know these, I'm sure. In California, 35.6% of all firms are minority-owned. In California, 30.3% of all businesses are women-owned. I mean, we are at the top of the national scale. By numbers, we're the largest. By percentage, for minorities, we're number 3 in the nation. For women, number 9 in the nation. They exist, Faith.
The reason this is the case, in part, Brad, is that in government you have a mandatory RFP.
Explain.
Every 5 years.
Request for proposal.
A request for proposal. So every 5 years you go out to bid for goods and services. But in the private sector, this is not necessarily true.
Right.
And in the utility sector, this has not been true. So one of the things we've been talking about with the California PUC,
That's the Public Utilities Commission,
is to have them look at mandatory RFPs, so that this now at least brings to the forefront opportunities and now provides more opportunities for the diverse community to submit proposals or to team up with firms that have opportunities like this, so that we can broaden the base.
So as it relates to
opportunity.
the utility industry, for example, there is what's known as California General Order 156, you know it well, which requires utilities to voluntarily provide supplier diversity information, sets goals for certain businesses, for minority-owned businesses, 15%, for women-owned businesses, 5%. But one could argue, with a population of 35% minority-owned businesses, is 15% the goal?
Well, we believe the goal is far too low. It's been at the 20-25% number for a long time. We believe that the number should increase to 50%. And the reason we think it should be higher is that we're talking about specific opportunities where we can participate not just as a prime but as a sub. And so when you expand that base of opportunity, you expand the number of opportunities.
But in fairness, though, also like the CPUC, the GO 156, without that, and it comes really from the leadership, from President Pickard, who he used his bully pulpit to encourage all the utilities, the telecom, to increase their diverse suppliers, and they've done very, very well.
And as it relates to the cable industry, as you may know, every year for the last several years, there have been supplier diversity fairs near you, often in Orange County. One recently had over 100 folks attend for round-robin meetings with procurement. officials within the cable industry. It was inspiring. It was inspiring.
Well, it's inspiring, and we like those opportunities because they do give us the opportunity, meaning the diverse community, the opportunity of putting our proposals and our presentations and meeting people that cause opportunities
It's
to
relationships.
get to the forefront. It's
you
all
gotta
relationship.
meet them. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, by the way, that in California, through the PUC and otherwise, we also look to create diverse supplier diversity with regard to disabled veterans and the LGBT community. So it's
very inclusive, and that's what it's all about. It's all about being inclusive. But we know that the suppliers themselves know who we are, know what the goals should be. But there is resistance, Brad, and so we constantly are trying to get, example, the PUC to make some of these meet and greet things mandatory, as opposed to voluntary.
What was remarkable to me, Charles, you may be aware of this, what's critical for companies to manage is they need to be certified. They need to get registered and to be even considered as part of the RFP. And at this recent supplier diversity fair, for example, there was a clearinghouse that was there to help through the registration process. So what you don't know, you don't know. And if you don't know you have to get registered, you don't know.
And that's why I think these platforms are so important. Right? We've got to create opportunities for communities who are less informed and have less literacy in the space to really be equipped to do it.
And you said it, less literacy in the space. It's not that they don't know what they're doing. You don't know what you don't know. It's that simple. Gil, I want to ask you, if I may, it may seem like a self-evident question, but help me out with it. Why is supplier diversity important? Why does it matter who makes this pen that may say Charter Communications?
The American dream is to be successful at every level, no matter what you do. You go to college, you think that some people want to work for somebody, some people want to be in their own business, but for any community, any ethnic community to be successful, you've got to have successful people. You have successful businesses.
Right.
You create your wealth, you create your leadership, you create opportunities for your family, and also it makes you feel proud when you're successful. So at all of those levels, it's very, very important to have ethnic minority businesses be in the front line of success.
And Brad, I really want to take this opportunity because the utilities, the telecom and cable has a lot of more work to do as well. But the insurance companies, they're very bad. I'm sorry, but I think this is a platform for me where I can really encourage insurance companies to develop a good supplier diversity program. Have a goals. I mean, if CPUC have done it, California Public Utilities Commission have done it, Department of Insurance, I know they're copying. They do.
They have a goal?
Yes, they also have a goal. But I think it has to come from the CEOs of this insurance company and major corporation. It is the right thing to do.
It's part of the boardroom. We're back to the boardroom.
It makes a business sense. So, I'm really encouraging every corporations to have not only have a supplier diversity program in their company, but the implementation of it.
And that's the key. And in the industry that's telecommunications, the PUC can help, for example. Maybe the Department of Insurance can help with regard to the insurance industry. It doesn't have to be complicated.
It doesn't. Davy Jones, the insurance commissioner, is trying to do a good job, but unfortunately, he doesn't have many enforcement tools. So it's more voluntary. So really, it rests on the board. It rests on the CEOs of the insurance companies to put their foot forward because they are lagging behind greatly.
When we come back, I want to turn to Reverend Dorsey, and I want to talk about faith-based diversity. That is a conversation I've been looking forward to. My name is Brad Pomerance. You're watching Charter Local Edition. Welcome back to a special edition of Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are speaking with three individuals focused upon diversity and using the rich diversity in America to improve the lives of all. I want to turn to our friend Reverend Charles Dorsey. He is with Christ Our Redeemer Church, which happens to be in Irvine, California, focused on community development. And I remember a few years ago, a very well-known publication talked about Sunday being the nation's most segregated hour. And recently, Pew came out with a study, talked about diversity in faith-based institutions, and as a general proposition, Sunday is our most segregated hour. A few faiths not, Seventh-day Adventists, Islam, Jehovah's Witnesses, Catholics, but you look at Southern Baptists, Mormons, Jews, Episcopalians, Methodists, AME, very segregated.
Absolutely.
What do you make of that, sir?
I think it's still a challenge. I think that when we talk about diversity within faith communities, it is a place of comfort, and it is a place where people go to develop identity, and so it would make sense that it is saturated with people of the same race and the same culture. And yet, the belief that most faith-based organizations have is integration and making sure that we're available to all.
And yet what's so interesting to me, I've walked into many places of worship of a whole host of faiths, incredibly inviting. You know, if there's ever a place where you're going to feel welcome, I don't care what faith you are, you're welcome. And so it is interesting to me that, you know, Sunday continues to be so segregated, and even segregated within faiths. I mean, I think about the Latino community as a general proposition. Folks of Irish descent who are Catholic will go to one church. Folks of Latino descent will go to another church. Filipinos who happen to be Catholic may go to a third church, and yet all, you know, praising the same gospel, I guess you could say.
It's a very vulnerable place, and I think that we have to make sure that we create a space for people who look different to experience the same vulnerability without having to look and say, well, I got to make sure that the person next to me looks like me or talks like me. But I think there's something else there, Brad, and that is that even where there is diversity, there may not be diversity of thinking.
And I want to talk about that. You sent me a study that knocked my socks off. The study was put out by this Journal of Sociology of Religious Journal. Well, let me say that one again. The Sociology of Religion Journal put out just a few months ago, and it talked about how in larger multicultural congregations, minority members tend to adopt the views of the majority white members.
So this is actually one of the reasons why segregation can be seen as something that actually empowers certain communities of color, because people are not interested in coming into a place and having their culture absorbed in a dominant culture. They want to be in the space and be able to be themselves and still feel like there's power and acknowledgement and culture there. For example, the African American church still continues to be the place where people come to figure out what it's like to be an African American person in the United States. And they get that in that church. They get that in that worship experience. It's the place where you can come and have power and not have anybody threaten or move you out of that position of power.
And yet what's interesting, you may not know this, is that in smaller multicultural congregations, there tends to be a more diverse thought and often more progressive and therefore more tolerant. So I don't know if that's a plus or a minus. I guess it is what it is.
I think the smaller churches hold a model for some of the major churches. I think we have to look at, when we get in the smaller places, we can really get to know people better. That's the challenge with churches and faith-based organizations that grow large. There's this group think concept that merges everybody into the same space, but smaller places don't have that challenge.
You are at a church that's very large, but I think it's fair to say is a model of interfaith relations. Recently, Faith and I were there. I don't think Gil was able to join us at your National Faith Leaders Conference. Folks of every single faith, Christian, Catholic. The Bishop of Orange County spoke, the Bishop of Orange County. There were rabbis, I think there were imams, I'm not sure, but I know there were Muslims there as well. Why is it that your community, your church is so dedicated, so devoted to interfaith relations?
I think as a model, the AME Church has always been on the forefront of fighting for justice of many people. Even though the word African and African Methodist Episcopal kind of causes people to question, we still have to invite our doors open to anyone who has struggles with injustice everywhere. And every one of us sitting on the panel has that opinion. But the truth is, it's work, it's difficult, it's not easy for people to come together. And so we have to do a great job at creating a space. And that space has to be a place where you can come and wear what you want to wear, say what you feel or feel compelled to say, pray to the God that you really honor as your God.
And let's talk about to whom one prays. So another study came out, the Interfaith Prayer Study from the American Sociological Review, and it talked about how interfaith prayer can be so powerful, yet it needs to be inclusive. So the preacher will say, if you want to pray to Allah, you want to pray to Adonai, you want to pray to Jesus, whomever you want, join us. Faith.
I want to add that faith-based it's not really real cross, vertical, horizontal.
Yeah.
A lot of the faith-based now have CDC, so it's
Community
not
Development
about,
Corporations, just
it's
like
not, it's not about just a Bible study anymore. They do education there, they do home ownership, they even do micro-lending.
Right, and let me ask you about that, because we met at the National Faith Leaders Conference, and I remember thinking to myself, why is the president of the National Asian American Coalition here? But after it made sense, because faith-based organizations, be it the Catholic Church, be it the NAAC, it's about the whole person. It's about offering services to the whole unit, the whole family.
And it's
Please.
in addition to the services, we're talking about working together. And you work together. You don't work just together at the office, but you work together when you go home. You work together at the church. You work together at all these different spaces. And you're meeting people. We're talking about networking. You're always meeting people. You're always trying to make sure that you're in touch with what's really going on.
And that
the
could play
churches are
into supplier diversity, boardroom diversity, because it's about relationships.
And I want to say that it's also an intersection of obstacles. The faith-based organization becomes a place where I can come and I can say, I can't pay my bill. I'm losing my home. And I can say that in a safe space and not be judged and not be criticized. And so it is impendent. And I would say to all of those faith-based organizations, it is time for us to become those places that partner with our brothers and sisters to say, if this is a space where you can express it, this is also a place where you can get that need met. And so that's part of what we're trying to create.
And what always stumped me a bit, and not to exclude any faiths, but when I think about America, Christianity, the main faith, the major faith, Judaism is also present, Islam is also present. Those are the three great Abrahamic monotheistic faiths. We all come from the same kind of tradition. Interfaith relations should feel natural. At least with regard to those three faiths. Am I off base?
That should be the case.
Right.
Unfortunately, somewhere along the way, translation gets in the way.
We lost our way.
But obviously, the idea about faith, the idea about God, the idea about working with each other and helping each other, all is faith-based. But for whatever reason, it gets lost in translation.
I know what has not got lost in translation. It's the importance of this discussion. And I want to thank the three of you for joining us. And I want to say, please, let's continue the conversation.
Absolutely.
Progress has been made, but more needs to be done. And hopefully through conversations like this, we can express our views. I'm neutral, but I'm giving y'all a vehicle to kind of explain the importance of these very critical issues. Her name is Faith Bautista. She is the president and CEO of the National Asian American Coalition. His name is Gil Vasquez. He is the chairman of the Los Angeles Latino Chamber of Commerce. And of course, we have Reverend Charles Dorsey with Christ Our Redeemer Community Development Corporation. My name is Brad Pomerance. Thank you so much for joining us on Charter Local Edition.